If someone had told me 10 years ago that my friendship with Julian Vance would detonate in a single night, I would have believed them. I just would have pictured a different kind of explosion. One of anger, of finality, of him finally getting sick of my quiet orbit around his burning star and walking away for good. I would never have imagined it would be like this. A quiet implosion, a collapse of every wall I had ever built, all happening in the space between one breath and the next, in the dim light of my own living room. For a decade, Julian was a fixed point in my universe. We met in college, two opposite ends of a social magnet somehow stuck together. He was loud where I was quiet, bold where I was hesitant, a creature of sunlight and easy laughter while I was more comfortable in the shadows, observing. He collected friends like I collected books, effortlessly, and with a genuine affection for each one. I was just another volume on his crowded shelf, I thought. A familiar story he returned to out of habit. My world was a carefully curated space of routine and control. My small apartment, with its alphabetized bookshelves and precisely aligned coasters, was a fortress against the chaos I felt churning inside me. I worked from home as a graphic designer, a job that suited my solitary nature. My days were predictable. Coffee at 7. Work until noon. Lunch. More work. A walk in the evening. Dinner alone. It was a life built for one. A safe life. Julian was the one glorious, terrifying exception to my rules. He would appear at my door without warning, a whirlwind of energy and takeout containers, dragging me out of my shell and into the loud, bright world he inhabited. He was physically imposing, with broad shoulders from years of swimming and a height that always made me feel like I was craning my neck to see the sun. His presence filled a room, not with arrogance, but with a kind of crackling, kinetic life. And from a distance, from the safety of our established friendship, I watched him. I studied him. I learned the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was genuinely amused, a subtle shift from his more public, performative smile. I knew the exact pitch of his laugh when he was tired. I saw the flicker of something deep and lonely in his gaze when he thought no one was looking, usually across a crowded room at a party he was the center of. This was our distance. The vast, unbridgeable chasm of platonic friendship. He would drape an arm over my shoulders, call me his best friend, his brother, his rock. Each word was both a comfort and a tiny, sharp sting. He saw me as a constant, a safe harbor. He had no idea that for me, his casual touch was an electric shock, his proximity a test of my own carefully constructed composure. My love for him was a secret I kept locked in my own ribcage, a frantic trapped bird beating its wings against bone. It was a truth so dangerous it could burn our entire history to the ground. So I kept it hidden. For 10 years, I kept it perfectly, achingly hidden. Then came Chloe's birthday party. The disruption. I hated parties. The press of bodies, the overlapping conversations that became a meaningless roar, the social expectation to be bright and engaging. It was my personal hell. But Julian had asked me to go. He'd shown up at my door with that lopsided grin, holding a bottle of whiskey like a peace offering. You can't bail, Leo. It's Chloe. And besides, you need to get out of this hermitage. He said it with affection, but it still pricked at my insecurities. My hermitage was my sanctuary. But for him, I would brave the fire. I always did. The party was exactly as I dreaded. A crush of people in a downtown apartment that was too small and too hot. The music was a physical force, a bass line that vibrated up through the soles of my shoes and into my teeth. I found a corner, nursing a drink I had no intention of finishing, and did what I always did. I watched Julian. He was in his element, a master of this domain. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, greeting people with a clap on the back or a warm hug. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a beacon of effortless charisma. And as always, a familiar ache settled in my chest. It was the pain of wanting to be closer, of wanting to be the reason for that unguarded joy. I saw him take a shot. Then another. I saw him get pulled into a loud, boisterous drinking game. He caught my eye once from across the room and gave me a wide, goofy grin, lifting his glass in a toast. I offered a weak smile in return, my stomach twisting into a familiar knot of longing and anxiety. I was a ghost at his feast, a spectator to his life. The night wore on. The air grew thicker, heavy with sweat and spilled beer. My social battery, never very robust to begin with, was completely drained. I was planning my escape route when I saw the shift. It was subtle at first. Julian's movements became a little less precise, his laughter a little too loud. He was leaning heavily against a girl I didn't recognize, his words slurring slightly. He wasn't just drunk. He was getting lost. Then came the confrontation. A guy with a neck thicker than my thigh cornered Julian near the kitchen. I couldn't hear the words over the music, but the body language was universal. Jabbing fingers. Puffed chests. Julian, usually so adept at de-escalating, just looked confused, swaying slightly. He was vulnerable. Something inside me snapped. The quiet observer, the anxious hermit, was gone. In his place was a fierce, cold resolve. I pushed my way through the crowd, my heart hammering against my ribs not with fear, but with a strange, protective fury. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the din. I put a hand on Julian's arm. "We're leaving." The big guy turned his glare on me. "This doesn't concern you, pal." Julian blinked slowly, his focus shifting to my face. For a moment, he seemed to register who I was. "Leo. Come on, Jules." "Time to go." I tugged his arm, my grip surprisingly firm. I didn't look at the other guy again. I just pulled Julian, who stumbled along behind me like a great, bewildered bear. We pushed through the throng, out the apartment door, and into the blessed quiet of the hallway. The sudden silence was dizzying. Julian leaned against the wall, his whole body slumping. What was that about?" he mumbled, his eyes glassy. "Nothing," I said, fishing for my keys. "You've had enough. I'm taking you home." He fumbled for his own pockets. "My place it's the other way." "No. You're in no shape to be alone. You're coming back to my apartment." It wasn't a suggestion. The words came out with a certainty that surprised even me. He didn't argue. He just nodded, a slow, heavy motion, and let me guide him down the stairs and into the cool night air. The forced proximity had begun. My carefully ordered world was about to be invaded, and all I could feel was a terrifying, exhilarating dread. The taxi ride was a blur of streetlights smearing across the rain-slicked windows. Julian was silent, his head resting against the cool glass. His usual vibrant energy was gone, replaced by a heavy, exhausted stillness. I watched the reflection of his face in the window, the strong lines of his jaw softened by shadow and fatigue. This was a Julian I rarely saw. The public mask was gone, and what was left felt fragile, breakable. Getting him up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment was an ordeal. He was a dead weight, leaning on me so heavily I could feel the heat of his body through my jacket. The scent of him, whiskey, sweat, and the familiar, clean smell that was just him, filled my senses, short-circuiting my brain. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Just a friend helping a friend, I chanted to myself, a mantra against the rising tide of everything else. I finally wrestled the door open and guided him inside. He stumbled into the living room and collapsed onto my sofa, one arm thrown over his eyes. The silence of my apartment, usually a comfort, now felt charged, electric. He was here. In my space. In my fortress. The chaos had breached the walls. I stood there for a moment, just breathing, my own adrenaline slowly receding. He looked southwest out of place on my neat, gray sofa. A vibrant splash of color on a monochrome canvas. His long legs were stretched out, his worn leather boots scuffing the floor I had just cleaned this morning. It felt like a violation and a benediction all at once. "Water," he rasped from behind his arm. I snapped into motion, grateful for a task. In the kitchen, my hands shook as I filled a glass from the tap. My reflection in the dark window was a pale, anxious stranger. "Get a grip, Leo." When I returned, he had pushed himself into a sitting position. He took the glass with a mumbled thanks, his large hand brushing against mine. It was nothing. A fleeting, accidental contact. But for me, it was a brand. Heat flared up my arm, a searing path straight to my chest. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. I prayed the dim light hid the flush I could feel creeping up my neck. He drank the water in 3 long swallows, his throat working. He set the empty glass down on my precious wood coffee table, leaving a perfect, wet ring. The old me would have flinched, would have immediately swooped in with a coaster. But tonight, I couldn't bring myself to care. All my carefully constructed rules were dissolving. This was the beginning of the thaw. In the quiet intimacy of my apartment, with the city humming a distant lullaby outside, I began to see him differently. Or perhaps, I was finally allowing myself to truly see him at all. He was running a hand through his already messy hair, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked weary. Not just tired from the alcohol, but a deeper, soul-level exhaustion. It was a crack in the confident facade I knew so well. "I'm sorry, Leo," he said, his voice low and rough. "For all this. For that idiot at the party." "It's fine," I said, my voice too quick, too bright. "Don't worry about it." "No, it's not." He looked up at me, and his eyes were startlingly clear for a moment. The drunken haze seemed to recede, leaving behind a raw vulnerability that struck me silent. "I make a mess. I always make a mess. And you're always the one who cleans it up." My throat felt tight. The power dynamic, the one where he was the sun and I was the satellite, was suddenly, dizzyingly inverted. Here, in my quiet space, he was the one who was lost, and I was the one who held the map. I was the one in control. It was a terrifying and exhilarating realization. I sat down in the armchair opposite him, keeping a careful distance. A buffer zone for my own sanity. "You do the same for me," I managed to say. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "When have you ever needed it? You've got your life so perfectly figured out, Leo. Everything in its right place." He gestured vaguely around my living room, at my ordered books and clean surfaces. He said it like an accusation. Or maybe, like an expression of envy. I didn't know what to say to that. My perfect life was a cage of my own making. He saw order, I felt confinement. He sighed, a long, rattling sound, and leaned his head back against the sofa cushions, closing his eyes. The harsh overhead light carved new shadows onto his face. I saw the faint, silvery line of a scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a relic from a childhood fall I'd forgotten about until now. I saw the tiny network of lines around his eyes, etched there by 1,000 smiles, but also by a weariness I was only just beginning to comprehend. His hands, usually so expressive and full of motion, lay limp in his lap. They were strong hands, with calloused palms and neatly trimmed nails, but tonight they just looked tired. My carefully guarded heart ached. This was the Julian nobody else got to see. Not the life of the party, not the charming friend, but the man underneath it all. The man who was lonely in a crowded room. "You should get some sleep," I said softly. He didn't open his eyes. Yeah. The logistics hit me. He couldn't go home. My apartment had one bed. My bed. A place so private, so intimately mine, that the thought of him in it sent a jolt of panic through me. You can take my bed," I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. "I'll take the couch." He finally opened his eyes, a slow, lazy motion. He looked at me, then at the couch he was on, then back at me. A faint, knowing smile touched his lips. "No way, man. It's your place. I'm crashing here. It's comfortable enough." The thought of sleeping in my bed while he was just a few feet away on the couch felt just as impossible. The intimacy of it, the shared air, the knowledge of his presence in the dark. It was too much. "Okay," I whispered, my resolve crumbling. I got up and went to the linen closet, my movements stiff and robotic. I pulled out my spare quilt and a pillow. They smelled of lavender and cedar, of my solitude. I brought them back to the living room. He had already kicked off his boots and was lying down, curled on his side. He looked huge on my small sofa, a giant in a dollhouse. I draped the quilt over him, my fingers brushing against his shoulder. Another jolt. This one was different. It wasn't the sharp, shocking heat of before. It was a slow, deep current of warmth, a feeling of rightness. My hand lingered for a fraction of a second too long. I saw the muscles in his back tense slightly under my touch. I pulled away quickly, my heart hammering. I turned to leave, to escape to the relative safety of my bedroom. "Leo." His voice was a low murmur from the couch, thick with sleep. I stopped in the doorway, my back still to him. Yeah. There was a pause. I could hear the soft sound of the quilt shifting, the quiet hum of my refrigerator from the kitchen. The entire world seemed to shrink to the space of that silence. "Thanks," he said. It was just one word, but it was heavy with a sincerity that undid me. "For everything." "Anytime, Jules," I whispered to the empty hallway. And then I fled. In my room, I closed the door, leaning my forehead against the cool wood. I didn't turn on the light. I could still feel the phantom warmth of his shoulder under my fingertips. I could still smell the whiskey on his breath, see the unguarded vulnerability in his eyes. The carefully constructed dam of our friendship had developed a hairline crack. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the flood was coming. Sleep was impossible. I lay in my bed, in the dark, and listened. I listened to the unfamiliar sounds of another person breathing in my home. The soft, rhythmic cadence of Julian's sleep was a strange and powerful music. Every quiet sigh, every rustle of the quilt, echoed in the stillness of my apartment, a constant reminder of his presence just a thin wall away. My room felt different. It was no longer just my sanctuary, it was a waiting room. The air was thick with unspoken things, with a decade of feelings I had ruthlessly suppressed. Now, they were bubbling to the surface, stirred up by his proximity, his vulnerability. The fortress was compromised from within. I imagined him out there, curled on my couch. Was he dreaming? Did he feel the same strange charge in the air that I did? Or was he just a drunk friend sleeping it off, oblivious to the emotional maelstrom he had unleashed inside me? The overthinker in my brain spun 1,000 different scenarios, each one more painful than the last. He would wake up tomorrow, laugh this off, and everything would go back to normal. Except it wouldn't. Not for me. Something had irrevocably shifted. Hours passed. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed red, marking the slow march towards dawn. 2 a.m. 3 a.m. At some point, the quiet rhythm of his breathing stopped. I held my own breath, straining to hear. A floorboard creaked in the living room. My heart leaped into my throat. He was awake. I heard him move around, the soft padding of his socked feet on my hardwood floors. A soft click as he turned on the small lamp by the armchair. A sliver of warm, yellow light appeared under my bedroom door. What was he doing? Was he leaving? The thought sent a wave of cold panic through me. I lay there, paralyzed, listening. The silence stretched on. It was a different kind of silence now, an active, waiting silence. I couldn't stand it. I had to know. Slowly, carefully, I slipped out of bed. I crept to my door, my bare feet silent on the floor. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a long moment before I turned it, the latch clicking with a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot in the stillness. I pulled the door open just a crack and peered out. Julian was sitting on the edge of the coffee table, hunched over, his face in his hands. The lamplight cast long shadows across the room, making him look like a figure in a somber painting. He wasn't drunk anymore. The posture was one of pure, sober misery. He was perfectly still, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. This was the turning point. The private, dimly lit location. The raw, unguarded emotion. I should have closed the door. I should have retreated to the safety of my room and pretended I hadn't seen anything. It was the sensible thing to do. The safe thing. But I couldn't. Something pulled me forward, some instinct stronger than my fear. Julian. My voice was a croak. His head snapped up. His eyes were wide and haunted in the lamplight. There was no trace of sleep in them, only a deep, churning turmoil. He looked like a man on a precipice. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," I lied, stepping fully into the room. I let the door click shut behind me. I couldn't sleep. I walked over and sat in the armchair, the same one I'd occupied earlier. The roles were the same, but the context had changed entirely. The buffer of his drunkenness was gone. This was real. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He stared at the floor, at the intricate patterns of my worn Persian rug, as if it held all the answers. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness. "Everything," he said, the word heavy and final. He looked up at me, and his gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch. "I'm so tired, Leo. I'm tired of all of it. The parties. The noise. The pretending." The confession began. Not of love, not yet. But of something deeper, something more fundamental. A confession of the soul. "Pretending what?" I prompted gently. "That I'm okay," he said, a bitter edge to his voice. "That I'm this happy, easygoing guy who has it all figured out. It's all a performance. And I think I forgot who I am when the curtain comes down." He looked around my quiet, ordered living room. "Then I come here. And it's so quiet. It's real. You're real." My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. The frantic bird was battering itself senseless against my ribs. He stood up and began to pace the small space between the sofa and the bookshelf. A caged tiger in my tiny apartment. "Everyone wants something from me," he continued, his voice growing stronger, fueled by a long-suppressed frustration. "My parents want me to be a successful lawyer. My friends want me to be the life of the party. Girls, they want the idea of me they've built up in their heads. Nobody actually sees me." He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his body silhouetted against the lamplight. "Except you." The two words hung in the air between us, shimmering with a terrifying power. "You've always seen me," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Even the parts one tried to hide. You see them, and you don't run away." He took a step closer. And another. He was standing in front of me now, so close I had to tilt my head back to look at him. I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the dark, swirling confusion in his eyes. "Why, Leo?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why do you stick around?" And there it was. The question that I had spent 10 years avoiding. The question whose answer could destroy everything. My throat closed up. The words were trapped, a painful lump of unspoken truth. He must have seen the answer in my eyes. The fear. The longing. The decade of hopeless devotion. His expression shifted. The confusion softened into a dawning, incredulous understanding. "Oh," he breathed, a sound of soft revelation. "Oh." He slowly sank to his knees in front of my chair, so we were at eye level. The movement was so unexpected, so vulnerable, it shattered the last of my defenses. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment in the space between us before he gently cupped my jaw. His touch was electric. His thumb stroked my cheek, a slow, questioning caress. It wasn't the accidental brush of before. This was intentional. This was a question. "Leo," he whispered, his name a prayer on his lips. My carefully constructed world crumbled to dust. All the fear, all the anxiety, all the years of hiding, it all melted away under the warmth of his touch. All that was left was this moment. This dimly lit room. This man, on his knees before me, looking at me as if I were the only real thing in his world. I leaned forward, a barely perceptible movement. An answer to his unspoken question. His eyes fluttered shut, and he closed the remaining distance between us. The first kiss wasn't frantic or passionate. It was slow. It was hesitant. It was breathtakingly honest. His lips were soft, tasting faintly of whiskey and a deeper, sadder story. It was a kiss of discovery, a careful exploration of a territory both of us had been terrified to chart. It was a decade of unspoken words, of stolen glances, of quiet pining, all compressed into one single, shattering moment. I brought my own trembling hand up to rest on his, which was still holding my face. The kiss deepened slightly, a mutual surrender. It was a confession more profound than any words could ever be. It was the end of one story and the terrifying, beautiful beginning of another. And in the quiet of my living room, the world fell away, and there was only him. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through my blinds. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came rushing back. Julian. The living room. The confession. The kiss. I was in my own bed. Alone. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach, pulling tight. I sat up, my heart starting a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. The apartment was silent. Too silent. The comforting sound of his breathing from the other room was gone. "Julian." I called out, my voice raspy with sleep and fear. No answer. I threw back the covers and hurried into the living room. It was empty. The quilt I had given him was folded neatly and placed on the back of the sofa. The water glass was gone from the coffee table, presumably washed and put away. The room was exactly as it had been before he arrived. Tidy. Ordered. Solitary. It was as if he had never been here at all. Except for the faint indentation his head had left on the sofa cushion. A ghost of his presence. I stood in the middle of the room, a sudden chill seeping into my bones. He was gone. He had left without a word. Without a note. He had just vanished. The morning after anxiety hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My mind, my worst enemy, began its vicious spiral. It was a mistake. Last night was a mistake. A drunken, emotional moment that meant nothing to him. He woke up this morning in the cold light of day, sober and horrified by what he'd done. He was disgusted. By me. By the kiss. He couldn't even face me. He had to run. Each thought was a fresh stab of pain. I had been so stupid. I had let my guard down for one night, and this was the price. I had broken the one unbreakable rule. I had crossed the line. And in doing so, I hadn't just failed to gain a lover, I had lost my best friend. The 10 years of our friendship, the foundation of my lonely life, had been shattered by a single, hopeful, idiotic kiss. My stomach was full of angry bees. I paced the apartment, my bare feet cold on the floorboards. I checked my phone. Nothing. No calls. No texts. Just a blank screen that seemed to mock my desperation. I made coffee out of habit, but the smell of it made me nauseous. I stood by the window, looking down at the empty street, torturing myself with memories from the night before. His hand on my face. The look in his eyes. The soft, hesitant pressure of his lips. Had I imagined it all? Had I misinterpreted his drunken vulnerability as something more? The old solitude, the one I had once found so comforting, returned with a vengeance. But it was different now. It was tainted. Before, my apartment had been a sanctuary. Now, it was a crime scene. Every surface held a memory of him, and his absence was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. The quiet was no longer peaceful, it was a screaming void where his presence used to be. The day crawled by, an eternity of minutes. I tried to work, opening a project on my computer, but the lines and colors just swam before my eyes. I kept checking my phone, my thumb hovering over his contact photo. A picture of us from a few summers ago, both of us grinning, his arm slung casually over my shoulder. The image was a cruel reminder of what I had lost. Should I call him? Should I text? What would I even say? Hey, sorry about that earth-shattering moment of emotional honesty last night. Can we just pretend it never happened? The thought was humiliating. No. The ball was in his court. He was the one who left. The silence was his choice. By evening, I was a wreck. I had spun every possible negative scenario. He was telling our mutual friends what happened, and they were all laughing at me. He was changing his number. He was drafting a text message that would formally and brutally end our friendship. The anxiety was a living thing inside me, clawing at my insides. The first day of silence bled into a second. The void grew larger, more menacing. I didn't leave my apartment. I didn't answer my phone when my mom called. I existed in a gray limbo of regret and self-recrimination. I had finally dared to want something, and the universe had slapped me down for my audacity. The lesson was clear: stick to your fortress. Don't let anyone in. It's safer that way. On the evening of the second day, I finally gave up. Hope, that stubborn, foolish thing, had finally died. I accepted it. He was gone. Our friendship was over. I had to figure out how to live in this new, emptier world. I was standing in my kitchen, staring blankly into the refrigerator, trying to remember what it felt like to be hungry, when I heard it. A knock on my door. 3 sharp, hesitant raps. My entire body went rigid. It couldn't be. It was probably a delivery, or a neighbor. It couldn't be him. I didn't move, my heart frozen mid-beat. Another knock, louder this time. More insistent. My feet moved before my brain gave them permission. I walked through the living room, past the haunted sofa, and to the front door. I looked through the peephole. And my world stopped turning. It was him. Julian. He stood in the hallway, illuminated by the flickering fluorescent light. He looked terrible. Worse than he had the night of the party. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was a mess, like he'd been running his hands through it over and over. He wasn't wearing his usual confident armor. He just looked broken. And scared. For a long moment, I just stared at his distorted image through the fisheye lens. My fear warred with a sudden, fierce surge of hope. He was here. He had come back. My hand, trembling, reached for the lock. This was it. The return. The confrontation. The end of the agonizing silence. I took a deep breath and opened the door. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his eyes full of 1,000 emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. Regret. Fear. And something else, something that looked like a desperate, painful longing that mirrored my own. The clarifying conversation began without a single word. It started in the tense, charged silence between us, in the space of a shared, ragged breath. Can I come in?" he finally asked, his voice low and hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in days. I stepped back, wordlessly holding the door open for him. He walked past me into the living room, but he didn't sit down. He just stood in the center of the room, near the rug where he had knelt 2 nights before, looking like a stranger in a place that should have been familiar. I closed the door, the sound echoing the finality of the moment. There was no escape now. We had to face this. "You left," I said. It wasn't an accusation. Just a statement of fact. A fact that had been tormenting me for 48 hours. He flinched as if I'd struck him. He turned to face me, and the vulnerability I'd seen in him before was back, tenfold. The strong, silent facade was completely gone. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "Leo, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." "Why?" The question was all I had. "Why did you just disappear?" He finally met my gaze, and his eyes were glistening. "Because I was terrified," he admitted, the words raw and painful. "I woke up on your couch, and I remembered everything. The kiss. And it felt more real than anything I've felt in my entire life." My heart stuttered. This was not the rejection I had been steeling myself for. I didn't know what to do with that feeling, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. It was huge. It was terrifying. All I've ever done is run from things that scare me. So I ran. It was a stupid, cowardly thing to do. I ran from you. I ran from this, he gestured to the space between us. "These last 2 days," he said, shaking his head slowly, "have been the worst of my life." The silence, it was so much louder than any party. All I could think about was you. About the look on your face. And how I might have just destroyed the best thing I've ever had. The frantic bird in my chest stilled. The bees in my stomach dissolved. In their place, a fragile, tentative warmth began to spread. "I thought you were disgusted," I confessed, the words tasting like ash. "I thought you regretted it. That you were horrified." A look of genuine pain crossed his face. "No. God, no, Leo. Never that." He took a step closer to me. "The only thing I regret is leaving. I wasn't running from you. I was running from how much I wanted to stay." He stopped just in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He looked down at me, his expression earnest and pleading. "This is all new territory for me," he said softly. "The feelings. It's frightening. But the thought of losing you. That's infinitely worse. I don't know what this is, or where it's going. All I know is that I don't want to go there without you." We stood there, breathing the same air, the truth finally laid bare between us. All the fear, the misunderstandings, the years of unspoken things, had been stripped away, leaving only this raw, vulnerable honesty. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. On the ring, along with the keys to his car and his own apartment, was a single, small, silver key. The spare to my apartment. He had carried it for years, just in case of an emergency. He fumbled with the keyring, his fingers clumsy, and worked the small key free. He held it out to me in the palm of his hand. It was the symbolic gesture. The tangible act. "I don't want to carry this for emergencies anymore," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I want you to have it back. And I want you to give it to me again, but for a different reason. So I can come home. Not just crash here. But come home." Tears I hadn't realized I was holding back welled in my eyes. I looked from the key in his hand to his hopeful, anxious face. This was real. This was happening. I took the key from his palm, my fingers closing around the cool metal. Then, I gently took his hand, turned it over, and placed the key back in his palm, closing his fingers around it. "Welcome home, Jules," I whispered. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, chasing away the shadows. It was the real smile, the one that reached his eyes. And then he was closing the final distance between us, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me into an embrace that was so full of relief and promise it felt like I could finally breathe again after 10 years of holding my breath. He buried his face in my hair, and I held onto him, my fortress walls not just breached, but joyfully demolished. The next morning, I woke up slowly, drifting into consciousness on a sea of warmth and contentment. For a moment, I was confused by the heavy weight across my chest, the unfamiliar scent of sandalwood and sleep in my pillows. Then it all came back, and a slow, easy smile spread across my face. "Julian." I turned my head. He was still asleep, lying on his side facing me. His arm was draped over my waist, holding me close. His face, in the soft morning light, was completely relaxed, stripped of all its usual tension and guardedness. He looked younger. He looked peaceful. This was the new beginning. The domestic intimacy I had never, in my wildest dreams, allowed myself to imagine. His presence in my bed didn't feel like an invasion. It felt like a completion. As if there had always been this empty space beside me, and I had just never realized it until it was filled. I lay there for a long time, just watching him breathe. The quiet, rhythmic sound was no longer a source of anxiety, but the most comforting sound in the world. I studied the curve of his eyelashes against his cheek, the way a stray lock of dark hair fell across his forehead. These were the details of a new reality, and I wanted to memorize every single one. Eventually, his eyes fluttered open. He blinked a few times, his gaze slowly coming into focus on my face. A sleepy, gentle smile touched his lips. "Morning," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Morning," I whispered back. He tightened his arm around me, pulling me even closer until our foreheads were touching. There was no awkwardness. No morning after anxiety. There was just a quiet, profound sense of peace. "This is better," he said, his breath warm against my skin. "Better than running away in a blind panic?" I asked, a hint of teasing in my voice. The humor, which had been absent for so long, felt natural again. He winced, a flicker of the old guilt in his eyes. "Okay, I deserve that." "Yes." "Infinitely better," he paused, his expression turning serious. "Thank you for opening the door yesterday." "I'll always open the door for you, Jules," I said, and I meant it more than I had ever meant anything in my life. We didn't need to say anything else. We just lay there, tangled together in the sheets, letting the comfortable silence speak for us. Later, we made coffee together in my small kitchen. It was a simple, mundane act, but it felt revolutionary. Our bodies moved around each other in the confined space with an easy, unspoken choreography. His hand brushed my back as he reached for a mug. I passed him the sugar, our fingers touching for a brief moment. Each point of contact was no longer a jolt of panic, but a small, reassuring anchor. We sat on the couch, our couch, I thought with a small, secret thrill, and drank our coffee. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The silence was comfortable, filled not with absence, but with a shared sense of contentment. He reached over and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and we just sat there, watching the city wake up. This was it. This was the life I never knew I was missing. The quiet moments. The shared routines. The simple, profound joy of not being alone. I thought back to the man I was just a few days ago, locked in my fortress of solitude, convinced that safety was the same as happiness. I had been living a life in grayscale, too afraid to reach for the vibrant, terrifying color that was Julian. He wasn't a disruption to my life. He was the plot twist I desperately needed, the one that revealed the story was never about a man in a lonely tower. It was always a love story, just waiting for the second character to be brave enough to say his lines. He had to find the courage to confess his loneliness, and I had to find the courage to accept that I was worthy of being the one to soothe it. My fear of emotional risk had been the real cage, not my apartment. And Julian, with his own messy, beautiful, chaotic heart, had handed me the key. He turned to me, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "What are you thinking about?" I looked at him, at this man who had been my best friend for a decade and was now, somehow, miraculously, something more. I saw my past and my future reflected in his eyes. "I was just thinking," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face, "that I've never really liked parties. But I think I'm grateful for that 1 inch." His grin was radiant, the sun breaking through the clouds. He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, coffee-flavored kiss that was full of promise. It wasn't a kiss of desperate confession or hesitant discovery anymore. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. Have you ever had a single moment that split your life into a before and an after? A moment so profound it rewrites your entire past and illuminates your future. I wonder how many people are standing on the edge of a moment like that right now, terrified to take the leap. All I can say is, the view from the other side is worth the fall. For anyone who has ever felt like they were living on the sidelines of their own life, I hope you find the courage to step into the story. I hope you find your Julian. Or maybe, you'll find the strength to be the Julian in someone else's story, the one who knocks on the door, the one who admits they're scared, the one who comes back. Because the quiet, comfortable mornings are worth all the loud, terrifying nights it takes to get there. My life is no longer a fortress. It's an open door. And I'm finally, truly, ready for whoever wants to come in.